They told him to wait outside simply because he was a black man stepping into the first-class lounge. What they didn't know was that the man they had just dismissed was actually the chairman of the Airport Ethics Oversight Board. And just a few hours later, the very people who quietly discriminated would be forced to face the truth on the very screen they thought no one was watching. This isn't just a story about bias. It's a reminder when the one being judged speaks up, change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from silence backed by proof. If stories like this matter to you, hit the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and which part shocked you the most. Morning light stretched across the gleaming stone floor of Eastbridge International Airport, casting a soft golden hue on the brass-plated signs and the towering glass walls overlooking the runway. The scent of freshly roasted coffee floated through the air, blending with the rhythmic sounds of rolling suitcases and the calm voice of a woman announcing flight departures through the intercom. Amid the steady, silent stream of travelers moving like a determined river, Julian Hayes stepped into the first-class check-in area with quiet composure. He didn't draw attention not because he lacked presence, but because he chose not to flaunt it. A charcoal gray suit, a white mandarin-collared shirt, and perfectly polished black shoes. No flashy brands, no expensive accessories. Just a poised demeanor and observant, world-worn eyes. Julian reached for the e-ticket on his phone and approached the counter marked First Class, Eastbridge Priority. Waiting at the desk was a blonde woman with her hair tied back neatly, her uniform crisp, a small nameplate pinned to her chest, Angela Moritz. The polite smile on her lips barely lifted when her eyes landed on Julian, but the look in her eyes was anything but welcoming. "Sorry," Angela began, her voice cold and procedural. "This counter is for first-class passengers only." Julian nodded slightly, showing no reaction. He simply handed over his e-ticket and identification, his gaze steady, remarkably calm. Angela glanced quickly at the screen, then back at his face. A moment's hesitation. Then she tapped a few keys slower than usual. Her suspicious gaze never left the black man standing in front of her. "This flight is actually first class," she murmured seemingly to herself. "Are you sure you're at the right counter?" Julian didn't answer right away. He tilted his head, polite yet firm. This ticket was booked in advance. First class, from Eastbridge to Geneva. Angela said nothing, but her expression said enough. She remained at the keyboard, typing a few more lines, but without any acknowledgement. No greeting, no welcome. Just a delay that a white passenger would likely never have to endure. Just then, a middle-aged man in a light beige suit wearing a Rolex and carrying a monogrammed leather suitcase strolled past the queue and straight to the counter as if lines were for other people. "Darnell, John Darnell." "First class," he said, not looking at Julian, needing no further introduction. Angela changed instantly. Her voice lit up noticeably. "Yes, Mr. Darnell. Let me assist you right away." Her fingers danced effortlessly across the keyboard. The ticket printed, the smile emerged, and Mr. Darnell was ushered into the premium lounge in under 20 seconds. Julian remained silent. He didn't interrupt, didn't show emotion, just a faint furrow of his brow. Then he looked back at the screen, then at Angela. "I believe I'm still waiting to complete my check-in." Angela flinched as if remembering he was still there. "Yes. Sorry. Looks like the system's a bit slow. Please, just wait a little longer." Her voice lacked sincerity. Awkward. No more doubt, only avoidance. Julian nodded, but his eyes stayed on her. Not angry, not complaining, just observing. When Angela finally printed his ticket and offered the usual, "Have a nice flight," with her signature indifference, Julian simply smiled slightly. "Thank you," he said, then took the ticket and walked away at a measured pace. He didn't enter the lounge, didn't head to the gate. Instead, he turned right into a quiet hallway overlooking the runway. He took out his phone and opened a secure app. He typed a line, "Report, check-in point A1 first class, clear discriminatory attitude." He didn't send it immediately. He looked up again, back toward the counter where Angela was now smiling warmly at an elderly white couple in luxurious coats. He memorized the look in her eyes, her tone, and every unspoken word. Julian Hayes was not the ordinary man they assumed he was. He was the chairman of the Ethics Oversight Board for the entire Everline International Airport system, the lead of one of the most influential covert audit programs in the global aviation industry. But that morning at Eastbridge Airport, he was just a black man who didn't fit the first-class image. Few realized that the glances they so casually gave today would shape their own futures tomorrow. The Skyview Elite Lounge at Eastbridge International Airport is not a place just any traveler can enter. Tucked behind elegant frosted glass panels, its entrance is eerily quiet, as if sealed off from the rest of the world. A gold-plated sign reads clearly, "Skyview Elite Members Only," or by special invitation. Inside is a space bathed in soft golden light with imported hardwood floors stretching wall to wall, genuine leather chairs lined up along the windows overlooking the runway where each plane takes off in the silence of discreet luxury. Julian Hayes approached the reception counter with his usual composed demeanor. He had already scanned his first-class boarding pass. His Skyview Elite membership was in perfect standing, and on paper, everything was flawless. Behind the counter stood a man in his 30s, neatly trimmed hair, crisp navy blue suit. A name tag was pinned above his pocket, Devin Chu. When Julian walked up, Devin gave a courteous smile, just polite enough but not entirely welcoming. "Good morning, sir. May I see your membership card or invitation letter?" His tone was gentle, but beneath it lay a familiar layer of attitude, not outright refusal but unmistakable skepticism. Julian opened his phone and displayed the QR code from the Skyview Elite app. Blackstone level member, Flight 222 to Geneva First Class. Devin glanced at the screen. A brief hesitation. "Thank you, but I'll need to verify a few details. May I see a form of identification?" Julian remained courteous. He was used to being double-checked. Once might be random, twice could be coincidence, but when it becomes a pattern, he knows it's no longer chance. He handed over his ID. "I've already presented identification at check-in and the app confirms lounge access." "Is there a problem?" Devin kept the smile but avoided eye contact. "No major issue. It's just, in some cases, we need to verify through our internal security system as well." Julian nodded. "I'll wait." Devin disappeared behind a frosted panel. Nearly 2 minutes passed. When he returned, he wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark blue security uniform followed behind. His face was stiff, expressionless. Officer Langston, the name clearly displayed on the metal tag pinned to his chest. He stepped forward facing Julian. No handshake, no introduction. "Good morning. Due to a minor alert in the system, we need to re-verify your access. If you don't mind, please follow me to a private room for a quick check. It'll only take a few minutes." Julian's face remained unchanged. "What alert? I've already shown both my boarding pass and membership." "It's just a random security protocol," Langston replied. His voice was steady but not at all convincing. Around them, others sipped cappuccinos, browsed financial news on tablets, or typed quick emails. No one looked over. No one asked questions. Julian turned to Devin. "Was the alert triggered by the security system or by you?" Devin swallowed hard. "We're just following standard procedure, sir." Julian gave a dry smile. "A procedure that only applies to people like me." Langston tilted his head. "If you choose not to comply, we may have to deny your lounge access until verification is complete." "Very well," Julian said. "I'll come." He followed Officer Langston down a narrow hallway to a security inspection area, one most economy passengers never even knew existed. On the way, he said nothing. Just observed camera placements, guard access badges, the internal computer systems showing a temporary review icon. In the room, a young female security officer conducted a full inspection of Julian's carry-on. Scanners, UV lights, metal detectors, everything was used thoroughly, but nothing was out of place. Everything was valid. "Is there any reason I was brought here?" Julian asked, his tone firm for the first time. Langston looked away. System report flagged a possible identity duplication in the membership records. "Duplication," Julian repeated. "What a coincidence." Silence. After nearly 15 minutes, they returned his belongings and informed him that he was cleared to continue using the lounge, as if granting him a favor. Julian said nothing. He simply nodded and turned to leave. Just outside the hallway, he stopped by the wall, pulled out his phone, and opened the Ethics Council's internal app. The interface appeared instantly. Julian entered his high-level access code and filed a quick report. Subject: discriminatory behavior. Eastbridge Skyview Lounge time, 09:12 a.m. Involved personnel: Devin Chu, reception officer. Langston, security. Description: lounge access denied despite valid credentials. Unnecessary ID verification. Escorted to private screening without clear reason. No apology, no reasonable explanation. Category: bias by appearance. Recommend evaluation of first-class guest protocol in lounge area. He didn't send it immediately. Like before, he waited. Observed. Collected more. As he re-entered the lounge area, a few staff members glanced his way, then quickly looked away. Devin said nothing. No apology, just a slight nod as if nothing had happened. Julian quietly chose a seat by the window watching the planes on the runway. He wasn't angry. He didn't seek revenge. He simply took note of every gesture, every glance, every seemingly harmless word. Because for Julian Hayes, this wasn't just another flight. It was an audit. And every small act was stitching together a cultural map where kindness, bias, and silence all carried the weight of evidence. The Skyview Elite Lounge now resembled a perfect portrait of prosperity. Soft classical music floated through the air, golden light from crystal chandeliers reflected off wine glasses and polished glass surfaces. Julian Hayes sat quietly in a window-side seat, a still-cold bottle of mineral water in hand, eyes fixed on the Boeing slowly taxiing across the runway. He had already documented the first incident at the reception desk, followed by Officer Langston's conduct. But what happened next painted the picture more clearly. Not just suspicion, but a pattern of systemic behavior. No slurs, no overt aggression, just a string of details, each small enough to ignore, but when pieced together forming a pattern that could not be denied. Julian was reaching into his bag to organize some documents when a middle-aged man appeared in front of him, tall, salt-and-pepper hair neatly trimmed, wearing a light brown cashmere coat. No greeting, no eye contact. "Hold this for me," the man said, handing Julian a large duffel bag as if he were airport staff. "Be careful, there's camera equipment in there. Expensive stuff." Julian slowly looked up, his eyes locked onto the man's. "I don't work here," he replied evenly calmly. The man frowned and stepped back. "Oh, I thought you were—" "No," Julian cut in. "You thought wrong." The man, embarrassed, gave a slight nod and turned away but didn't apologize. No one else in the lounge seemed to notice what had just happened. People continued sipping espresso and flipping through travel magazines as if the moment had never existed. Julian exhaled quietly. Once again he opened the internal app and typed a note. "Passenger Peter Mallory. Mistook me for baggage staff without asking, no apology." Reaction rooted in assumptions about race and appearance. He wasn't angry. But he understood that each action like this was a brick in a much larger structure. And he was here today to trace the outline of that structure. 45 minutes later, a boarding announcement rang out from the lounge speakers. Julian gathered his things, stood up, and walked to Gate B12, the priority boarding zone for first-class passengers. The sign above was clear, "First-class boarding now open." The gate agent was a young woman with platinum blonde hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her name tag read Tina Alvarez. Julian approached and presented his digital boarding pass and ID. Tina glanced at her screen, then looked up. "Sorry, first class hasn't started boarding yet." Julian pointed to the screen directly behind her where the words "First class now boarding" were still flashing. "Perhaps your display hasn't updated," he asked, his tone polite. "We're currently prioritizing certain special passengers," she replied quickly, then turned to greet a white man who had just arrived. "Mr. Hemsworth. Welcome back. This flight's just as premium as you're used to. No further questions." Julian stepped aside and waited. Within the next 5 minutes, 3 more white passengers were allowed to board. None faced the same level of scrutiny. None were asked to wait. At last, Julian stepped forward again. "May I confirm, am I being denied boarding despite being on time and having a valid ticket?" Tina Alvarez hesitated. Then, as if realizing there was no longer a legitimate excuse, she scanned his pass and nodded. "You may board. Apologies for the delay." The apology came late and rang hollow. Julian said nothing. He stepped into the jet bridge and onto the plane bound for Geneva. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere resembled an art gallery. Genuine leather, walnut wood. The scent of Bourgogne wine and Hermès cologne lingered in the air. Julian placed his bag in the overhead compartment above seat 2A, then sat down and adjusted his collar. The lead flight attendant for the cabin was a woman in her 30s, tall, sharp-featured. Her name tag read Caitlin Reeves. "Good evening, sir," she said with a thin smile. "Need anything?" Julian asked gently. "I'd like to confirm the arrival gate in Geneva. If there's any change, may I check with the crew before deplaning?" Caitlin squinted. "What gate number, sir?" "Gate 82, Julian replied. "Gate 82, she repeated, enunciating each syllable slowly, mockingly, as if to tease his pronunciation. Then she turned to another attendant preparing the meal trays and called out loudly, "Hey, did you hear that, Gate 82? Guess he needs the alphabet chart." They chuckled. A quiet laugh, but just loud enough for Julian to hear. Then Caitlin leaned in slightly and asked under her breath, "English is your first language, sir?" Julian turned away without answering. He had learned the power of silence not from weakness, but from observation, from gathering. Once the plane had stabilized in the air, a man in a dark suit stepped forward from the rear of the first-class section. Not a passenger. An operations staff member, judging by the airline logo on his collar, Martin Denning. He leaned down to whisper to the passenger in seat 1C, his voice low. But Julian's ears were sharper than radar. "I swear," Denning said, "I don't know how people like that end up in this cabin." Julian turned just enough to catch the man's gaze. No confrontation needed, just memory. In the leather bag beside him, Julian's phone was still running its secure event log. He reopened the interface, entered the final note: Peter Mallory, mistook me for baggage handler. Tina Alvarez, delayed boarding without valid cause. Caitlin Reeves, mocked voice questioned English fluency. Martin Denning, discriminatory remark, people like that. He typed 2 final words before locking the screen. Pattern confirmed. Because this was no longer a series of isolated mistakes. It was a system. And Julian Hayes, the man they didn't think belonged here, was holding every single piece. The first-class cabin of Eastbridge Flight 1147 was bathed in soft light as the aircraft glided above the Atlantic's upper cloud layers. Below, everything moved as usual. The catering carts rolled rhythmically, spoons gently clinked against porcelain. The wind whispered outside the fuselage. But inside Julian Hayes's mind, a completely different system was in motion. He pulled his phone from his inner jacket pocket, his finger sliding across a silver hexagon icon, an app available only on devices authorized for top-level Eastbridge International Oversight Board executives. Beneath the icon, small text read, Veritas Echo. With a fingerprint scan and iris confirmation via the front-facing camera, the system unlocked. Status passive observation. Activate escalation. Julian didn't hesitate. He pressed yes. Phase 1 recorded. Instantly, an encrypted signal was transmitted to a hidden data center beneath Eastbridge International Airport's security Tier E level, unknown to anyone outside the Oversight Board. The system began pulling data fragments from dozens of sensors embedded throughout the flight cabin: cameras, microphones in the first-class lounge, personnel trackers, and even passenger feedback logs tied to onboard service. This was not a game. This was a cultural audit. Julian reopened the internal map. Event markers began to light up: B12, Gate Delay Alvarez Skyview Lounge, Access Friction Chew, Langston In-Flight, Recorded Mockery Reeves, Denning. He tapped into the audio feed, Cabin 1A2F. Instantly, the system played unfiltered voice recordings from Caitlin Reeves, Gate 82. "Are you sure English is your first language?" Julian paused on the latter phrase. His eyes didn't blink. He selected Flag as Tier 2, Microaggression plus Mockery. From this point on, the system would automatically extract similar patterns from future recordings. This was how he designed the platform: no emotional reaction, just evidence. Objective. Irrefutable. A moment later, the aircraft gently vibrated as it shifted altitude. Julian paid no attention. He was reviewing the visual anomaly, lounge behavior module. A blurred video clip appeared: Peter Mallory approaching Julian with a camera bag, thrusting it forward without asking, without making eye contact. In the frame, other passengers turned their faces away, not a single look of surprise. Julian tagged the video. A line appeared: AI confidence in visual bias, trigger 82%. He added a note: subconscious assumption confirmed. Tag class-based assumption, reinforced by race. Then another panel lit up on the dashboard: voice print match. Denning's statement. Julian opened the recording from Cabin 1D. "I just don't know how people like that get into this cabin." Denning's voice was clear, loud enough for 2 rows to hear. Julian pressed Escalate to Category 1, Leadership Bias. A red alert was attached to Martin Denning's personnel file: no one less than the journey coordinator for VIP passengers. Julian leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning the data stream. On his screen was an interactive map tracking his full 24-hour journey from the initial check-in point to his current altitude. Every staff interaction was color-coded: green for standard, yellow for questionable, red for severe violations. Almost all of them were yellow or red. At the underground internal command center of Eastbridge Airport, where only 7 individuals were cleared for access, a chain of servers received the trigger signal from Julian's device. The phrase Phase 1 was the activation cue for Eastbridge's technical, legal, and senior HR teams. This protocol could only be initiated by the chairman of the Oversight Board, the person with supreme authority over service culture, safety systems, and ethics in the aviation sector. The data was instantly synchronized with a specialized AI platform named EthosNet, where machine learning models analyzed employee behavior against millions of service expectation samples. standard courtesy behaviors, and latent bias indicators. Even minor actions like avoiding eye contact or using condescending tone were flagged by the system, not for immediate punishment, but to build a comprehensive profile that revealed the gap between policy and reality. Back in the cabin, Julian activated voice logging and spoke into his phone. "I don't need anyone to apologize, I just need to know whether the system functions the way it claims to. And right now the answer is no. People don't have to yell in your face to be discriminatory. Sometimes all they do is look past you as if you're invisible." He saved the file under the title Observation Log, Flight 147A, then sent it using a satellite-secured connection reserved only for auditors. No one in the first-class cabin knew that from the moment they boarded, their behavior had become part of a full system analysis map. No one knew they were being observed not by hidden cameras, but by the small decisions they assumed no one would ever record. As the plane began its descent, Julian closed the screen and pulled a small leather notebook from his breast pocket. He quickly scribbled a single line: "Every glance is a piece of evidence, every silence a choice." Sunrise at Eastbridge International Airport hadn't changed. Planes still took off. Announcements still echoed every 10 minutes. Hurried footsteps still swept across polished granite floors. But beneath that seemingly familiar rhythm, something had begun to shift. Not everyone saw it clearly, but those who had once known how the system operated, those who had known what it felt like to be invisible, they were the first to notice. Because true change, when it runs deep, doesn't arrive through signage or slogans. It arrives through glances, greetings, and the silence that now follows assumptions where prejudice once spoke. Helen Greer, former VIP service supervisor, now wore a neon yellow reflective vest. No more heels, no more embossed business cards, just a plastic name tag, steel-toed boots, and a posted shift schedule: trash cart duty shift 2 zone D4 to D9. On her first morning reporting to baggage operations, Helen stood still for a long time beside the cargo hold. A young woman on her team turned to ask, "You okay?" Helen didn't answer right away. Her eyes rested on the open cabin door, once her private space, now the place she entered with a different role. She nodded slowly and said quietly, "Give me a few minutes. I'll adjust." No one mocked her, but no one looked away either. Here everyone knew who she was, and why she was here. A few zones away, inside the staging kitchen that preps for the lounge, Caitlin Reeves, the one who had once mocked Julian's pronunciation, was learning to sort meal trays, wipe down stainless steel counters, and handle food waste. At first, she muttered complaints under her breath, but after a few days, when a coworker looked her in the eye and said, "No one here needs someone better, just someone kinder," Caitlin fell silent. By contrast, Clarice Wren, the security officer who once offered Julian a cup of water during an unjustified screening, was no longer wearing her blue uniform. In her new office on the 4th floor of the operations wing, Clarice wore a white shirt and a badge labeled Human Culture Development Specialist. She was adjusting the slides for a training titled Bias-Free Communication Training for Frontline Staff. Behind her was a new team: cultural consultants, organizational psychologists, social justice advocates, building a program unlike anything the airport system had ever seen: the core of service, redefining belonging. The new training model rested on 3 principles. Every small behavior is part of a larger culture. A raised eyebrow, a clipped "please," an avoided gaze, each was tracked through nonverbal behavior metrics and integrated into quarterly employee evaluations via new analytics software. Those who speak up at the right time, even without knowing who they're speaking to, lay the foundation. Clarice was the first example. She didn't know who Julian was. But in the moment she saw a man being subjected to an unnecessary inspection, she set her paperwork down and asked simply, "Would you like some water?" Not because she suspected anyone, but because she chose not to assume anything. Those who once erred, if brave enough to admit it, will pave the way for others to correct themselves. Helen was the first to enroll in the Leadership Restoration Track, a program for ethical rehabilitation of former leaders. In it, she told her story: no excuses, no defenses. "I used to think I was upholding standards. Turns out I was just protecting my own bias." Across the entire Eastbridge Airport system in just 2 months, over 9,000 employees had completed the first training round. More than 1,300 anonymous passenger feedbacks had been integrated into AI-generated culture reports. Lounge area cameras now tracked not only visuals but vocal tone, service speed, and active engagement across different passenger demographics. In an internal memo, CEO Donovan Kessler wrote, "We are not changing because of scandal. We are changing because of truth." And the truth is, if someone like Julian Hayes has to prove they belong, then our system has been broken from the start. A month later, Clarice was invited to speak at the Global Aviation Leadership Forum, where major airlines and airports convened to share policies on equity and workforce reform. She walked on stage not as a hero, but simply as someone who had done the right thing when everyone else was silent. She said, "I didn't save anyone. I just chose not to play the villain." On a weekend morning, Julian Hayes returned to Eastbridge Airport, this time not in silence. Displayed on the large digital marquee above the entrance were the words, "Welcoming Mr. Julian Hayes, architect of the next generation service culture." Not a tribute, but a reminder. Culture does not live in logos, but in how people look at one another, especially when no one else is watching. Julian entered the main hall and saw a group of staff bowing slightly to greet an elderly traveler. A black passenger was being welcomed into the VIP lane, no questions asked. A janitor was chatting with the lounge manager. No hierarchy, just person to person. He nodded softly. There was nothing more to say, because what needed to be said had already been proven through action. 1 month after the Eastbridge International Airport System officially announced its cultural reform initiative, an internal review conference was held at the Phoenix Hall, a glass-structured venue at the heart of the airport's administrative center, previously reserved for high-level investor meetings. Today, its doors were open to everyone. Beneath the glass dome, the late afternoon sunlight spilled across rows of neatly arranged seats. Over 300 employees from every department, security, check-in, janitorial, first-class lounge were in attendance. No color-coded lanyards, no nameplate hierarchies. Everyone sat together, and they listened. This wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. At the front of the stage stood a modest lectern made of light oak, softly lit. Behind it, a large screen played a short documentary reel, a staff member guiding a deaf passenger, a group of flight attendants assisting a lost child, and a clip of Clarice Wren offering a cup of water to a weary-looking passenger in the security zone. No narration, no credits. Just one line: culture doesn't live in roles, it lives in choices. When it came time for personal reflections, the first person called to speak was Helen Greer. The room fell silent as she walked up. No longer in a tailored gray suit, just a plain white blouse, a black skirt, and a small name tag that read Helen, Ethics Restoration Team. She stood at the mic for a moment, took a deep breath, and began. "I used to believe that as long as I didn't say anything discriminatory, as long as I wasn't rude, then I wasn't wrong. I thought I was following protocol, upholding standards. But that day, I didn't need to shout, didn't need to insult. All it took was silence at the right moment, a well-placed interruption, a polite delay, and I had effectively excluded someone I knew nothing about." She paused. Her voice grew rough. "I didn't curse, but I judged. I didn't cause a scene, but I excluded. And what shames me most is that I thought that was normal." The room remained silent. No whispers. Only the weight of honesty. When Helen stepped away from the podium, there was no applause, but no one looked away. And that, more than anything, was true listening. At that moment, the MC took the stage. No lengthy introduction, just a simple statement. Our next speaker likely needs no introduction, but today he's not here as chairman of the Ethics Oversight Board. He's here as someone who was once excluded and who chose not to retaliate, but to rebuild what was broken. Please welcome Mr. Julian Hayes. Julian stepped up to the lectern, no commanding suit. Just a collared shirt, sleeves gently rolled, and the same calm eyes he wore the first morning he entered this airport. He stood before the mic. His gaze didn't fix on anyone directly yet. Everyone felt as if he were looking right at them. I remember clearly what it feels like to be doubted just because I didn't fit the profile. I remember Angela's glance, Devin's words, Officer Langston's nod, and Caitlin's mocking smile. Those things I haven't forgotten. A soft breath was heard somewhere in the audience. But I also remember Clarice, who handed me a cup of water, not knowing who I was. I remember Helen's shaken expression the next day. I remember a whispered apology barely audible from a security officer after a closed-door meeting. He paused. His voice lowered, warm and steady. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is looking back at what happened and choosing not to let it control you. Choosing not to become the very thing you despise. The auditorium held its breath. I don't want a system that's afraid of lawsuits. I want a culture where people pause before they act wrong. I want that if anyone steps into Eastbridge, no matter who they are, where they come from, they should never have to prove they're worthy of being treated with respect. Julian nodded gently, closing. And if today Helen has the courage to stand up and name her mistake, then I'll be the first to step down and say I forgive you, because you were braver than many who still believe they were right. He stepped away from the podium. This time no one could hold it back. Applause rang out, not thunderous, not forced, but steady, deep, and sincere. From the front row, Clarice dabbed her eyes. Caitlin lowered her head. Helen stood, walked forward, and reached out her hand. Julian took it. No grand gesture, no proclamation, just a handshake, the beginning of something long absent, an apology received with trust. If this story moved you, leave a comment below what part of Julian Hayes' journey resonated most with you. And if you believe that stories of fairness, compassion, and change can shape a better world, don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Because sometimes one small action like sharing this video can inspire a big change. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.